Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this panel discussion titled The Cost of Cyber Insecurity, Quantifying Financial Risks and Economic Fallout. Moderated by Laura Buckwell, International Industry Event, EMCEE, and moderator. Our panelists are Jacky Fox, Security Global Strategy Practice Lead and Senior Managing Director, Accenture. Dr. Yiannis Pavlosoglou, Vice Governor, National Cybersecurity Authority, Greece. Johan Gerber, Global Head of Security Solutions, MasterCard.
Please be seated. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, the financial stakes of cyber threats have never been higher, with the average cost of a data breach reaching around $5 million just last year. So how can organizations reduce risk, build trust, and also protect their bottom line? Well, it's time now to find out, and I can think of no better panel lineup to tackle this subject. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. Right, I thought we'd do a bit of scene setting to start us off. So Yiannis, as the Vice Governor of National Cybersecurity Authority at the Ministry of Digital Policy for Greece, I was wondering whether you might be able to sort of tell us a little bit about the most common forms of cyber threats that you're seeing right now, and maybe you can also give us that regional, global perspective as well.
Absolutely, Roland. And thank you for this wonderful invitation. Great to be here with you today. So Southeast Europe, where Greece is located, we have a number of emerging cyber threats. And these do not only relate to the context of the geopolitical landscape, but more importantly, relate to the evolution of a nation coming out of a little bit of an economic turmoil and moving into the digital at 100 miles an hour. Key threats really relate to and are affiliated with attackers trying to exploit situations where the workforce is moving to more digital domains. So that's a common first, one of three emerging threats that we see. And the counter to that is quite a simple one as well. The counter is making sure that we educate people in and around what a modern cyber threat looks like. Number two on the list, unfortunately, relates to the most common, the ransom type of attacks where people encrypt your data and then in the form of Bitcoin or otherwise request for payment. Ransom are also quite simple to counter because of the socio-economic norm that you have in the nation of Saudi Arabia, similar to the nation of Greece, that being of a tightly knit society, knowing how to react. Backups work really well there. And then finally, we have a number of emerging threats which relate to adopting new technologies. I've actually seen a number of publications in the space of AI and similar, whereby because Greece is that size, that 12 million, you can try out things and be more successful in terms of how you counter and innovate in the space of controls in, for example, artificial intelligence. So not to make the long story longer, those are the three main areas. We start with the workforce, we look a little bit at the technical domain of ransom, and then the innovation that comes out of emerging new ideas and controls that we need.
So from a ministerial point of view, are you seeing this sort of on a global scale as well, in terms of a regional perspective? Well, can you give us an idea of that as well?
Yes, absolutely. So if we zoom out from the 10,000-foot view that is Southeast Europe to the 100,000-foot view that you have on a global scale and just produce some metrics, you mentioned some of them. Roughly speaking, we're looking at cybersecurity being an industry of 250 billion annual as a total, if you like, spend. Similarly, on the inverse side of that stratospheric global view, you have cybercrime being valued at 10 trillion. Now, those numbers might be off, but they can't be off by 3 digits, right? So the 3 orders of magnitude just give us the perspective of why we need to adopt strategies like the ones that we have in Greece, where we're being nimble, we're being agile, and also we know what we're up against in terms of threats. to be able to counter them.
Johan, over to you. Wonderful to have you here with us today. I was wondering whether you might be able to tell us a little bit more about MasterCard's role within cybersecurity. What are you seeing right now in terms of the biggest threats? And I know that you also released a white paper just last month in terms of the road ahead and examining the threat landscape over the next 5 years. So maybe you could give us an update on that as well.
Laura, first of all, thank you for having us and for the Global Cybersecurity Forum for hosting this event. It is so critical for us to get all of the thought leaders and the world leaders around the table to discuss these topics. I'm going to go also to the 100,000 feet level first. 3 big macro trends that we are observing right now. In the world, there's the technology race that's currently going on. Who's going to control AI globally? And we see massive investments. We see this playing out in a geopolitical place. We see it out in private enterprises as well. Talent is being fought over for ridiculous prices. So you've got that piece of context that's sitting there. Then we have the rapid digitization of the planet, how we are just getting more and more connected every single day. And then lastly, which is the concerning part, is the weaponization of these technologies, things like AI, things like quantum in the future, with all the data that gets stolen through some of these cyber hacks. So these are, if you take these 3 trends, and this is the world in which we operate. So as we look at the next, let's say 5 or so years, we look at a world that will be always connected, that will be fueled by AI. But on the geopolitical side, what concerns us most is that it will be bilateral instead of multilateral, which is why conferences like this is so critically important. So if you think about that, what we're trying to do in this world is we're looking at how do we help further the growth of economies. A company like MasterCard really does well when economies does well and people spend and we can convert cash into digital payments. Everybody benefits from these major trends, which is why we are investing. We've, over the last, I would say, 8 or so years, I've invested more than $10.7 billion into cybersecurity alone. We've recently acquired a company called Recorded Future as part of a threat intel capability that we so desperately needed, because we believe it's so important that we understand what the threat actors are doing. On the weaponization piece, and I'll hand the mic back to you, it is really concerning that AI is so much available to the attackers now, that irrespective of what your desired outcomes are, so if I'm a threat actor that has a criminal intent, I can get access to AI and I can automate my attacks. And we've seen this now happen where you can fully automate bots can actually attack companies. What we're doing on the other side is we are looking at, can we develop the antibody of AI agents to actually cure and go fight those attackers in there. So some of the things that we're investing in. But the threat that we're up against is, whether I'm a threat actor that has a criminal intent, an ideological intent, a other intent that I have, we all have access to this data, and that's why I think that the defenders have a much more complex role to play than ever before.
Really interesting. We can get to some of those points a little later as well, later on, so thank you so much. Jacky, great to have you here. So how does Accenture see the current cyber threat landscape, and especially when it comes to financial risks and economic fallout? Maybe you can give us an overview.
Sure, and I think, well, firstly, thank you very much for the GCF and to yourself for having us here today to discuss this. I think we tend to look at it from quite a sectoral perspective. When you're looking at the financial risks that an organization is carrying, basically by having cyber risk. And it's quite interesting. I would see 3 distinct areas in that space. So in financial services, they are generally more mature from a regulatory perspective, and they think about this, and they're used to holding financial reserves for credit risk. So the concept isn't foreign to them, although I'm not sure that they're all doing what they need to be doing. Could they be doing a little bit more? Are they carrying risk that they may not fully understand at the moment? I think probably yes. And when I ask an organization, do you have a war chest set aside to cope with a catastrophic event that could hit your organization? Most organizations are trying to get themselves resilient, maybe rather than thinking about the opposite side. But I would say financial services is generally higher up there. Critical national infrastructure. is probably not as well prepared in general, in my experience, from evaluating organizations. They're doing a lot better than they were, but like I, for example, was very heavily involved when our Irish health sector was hit. And the cost of that was very expensive. And it ultimately reverts back to the government who has to fund that, which is probably not an unusual concept when you say it's critical national infrastructure, we can't function without energy, we can't function without water, and those services being provided. But I think as well as the financial risk, we need to remember that there's a lot of non-financial risk that's carried by critical national infrastructure as well. And then the last group, the last sector, I would think is probably everybody else, and that's like, manufacturing, production, kind of, a lot of the kind of entertainment industry and things like that we have. And they're kind of good targets for people who want to attack and actually try and leverage money or get data out of them. So therefore, I do see that the fallout from that is becoming more evident. Like we're looking at some of the attacks that are going on in Europe at the moment around kind of automobile kind of manufacturing and the retail sector. And the fallout from them doesn't just impact them, it actually impacts all their third parties as well, and it impacts the employment of some of the people in those third parties. So it has a huge knock-on economic risk for society, which ultimately tends to be mopped up by the government, who may or may not have that war chest set aside for this type of event. So I think as a world, from a financial perspective, we are actually carrying a lot of risk related to cyber at the moment.
Yeah, because as you mentioned, we've got this whole issue around supply chain at the end of the day as well.
Yes.
So, you're only as strong or as weak as your supply chain, right?
Absolutely. And while regulation is getting quite strong globally, for financial services and critical national infrastructure, and it does spread out to their third parties, but their third parties have a journey to travel, and it takes a lot of money to become cyber resilient against the type of risks that people are facing. So sometimes we don't have the finances in the third party sector. And actually, I've heard some interesting discussions recently about us pretty much having a concentration risk, because only certain third parties will be able to meet that high bar that they're asked to get to. So we don't have as much innovation then in the sector.
So that leads me on really nicely in terms of, budgeting and budgets and, strengthening stronger collaboration when it comes to the public private sector partnerships. And that leads me on back to Johan for a moment in terms of SMEs. How do you think we can strengthen policy, regulation, national strategies to really help everyone, essentially?
Yeah, Laura, I think this is a fundamental question. In the wake of AI and the ability for attackers to automate attacks, my biggest concern is our small business community out there. The fact is that they employ about 90% of our workforce globally. They're responsible for about 50% of our GDP globally. So it's a very material force to be reckoned with when we look at economic certainty, at stability of our economies. And if this is under attack, there are dire consequences. So I think this is something that has to be raised up in terms of the level of priority of conversations that we need to do. And I see the public and private partnerships as key to do this. The technology is available now for us to make a much bigger impact. And I think if you just think about the backbone of the internet, it has the ability to deploy technology to anybody who uses it, including small businesses. Great technology that's out there in terms of enabling AI to help defend these small businesses, even if they don't touch anything. We can literally turn this on for them to help them protect it. The other thing is that AI is actually reducing the cost of defense, which is a wonderful thing. So I think if we can get this in a good harmony in how the private and the public interface can work well, I actually think we can bring this to the forefront. We have done so many efforts collectively with, we work with NGOs. There are many pillars here. We need to educate, which is critically important, to raise awareness. We need to enable them with tools. For instance, we have a big alignment with the Global Cyber Alliance, where we provide them with free toolkits, free training. But even then, it's some of our small business owners, they almost like, if you say cyber, they will stick their heads in the sand and say, I'm too small, they're not going to get me. The problem is, with AI, there is no place to hide in the connected world. And so I think this is where I think there's a fundamental shift that can happen when you bring technology players and governments, so in the public-private interface together, to actually move the needle materially for them.
Yiannis, what's your take on all of this, especially from an economic standpoint?
Yes.
What is the call for action for government, do you think? And how do we share those best practices as well at the same time?
We're fortunate enough in Greece to be part of the European ecosystem that has a number of call to actions through regulations, through legislation. It could be NIS2 for critical national infrastructure, it could be the Resilience Act, it could be the Cyber Solidarity Act. Legislation aside, there's an element of culture that we're bringing in that basically has this need for public and private partnerships to work together. And that's what we're using today to combat what the esteemed colleagues at Accenture and MasterCard have alluded to as third-party risk. I will even go further and give you an example in the context of fourth or fifth party cyber risk, whereby you lose count very easily. Instead of hacking our organization, Laura, I will get the florist that you use to deliver flowers to that organization and get the clientele from that channel. That particular situation probably involves a couple of PCs, a network, some basic controls. It's an example that we definitely joked about with Johan in the past, and one whereby if you don't have that public-private partnership and are looking out for, if you like, the black swans, the events that are very unlikely to happen but are going to cost you dearly, then you end up having an exposure that's really not catered for. So that has a call to action in answer to your question, a long-winded answer to your question. That has a very simple call to action, which is look at the black swan events that are likely to affect the public-private partnerships. It's not good enough to simply say that I have all my data in the cloud and therefore the third-party risk has been transferred. It's not good enough in 2025 to be saying that, oh, we have everything in a situation whereby we've done third-party risk assessments, because otherwise we wouldn't be reflecting what Jacky mentioned, that interconnectedness of the world, whereby you need to map out your network and just pull out the tweaks that you need to do. Finally, in the smaller world of the ecosystem that is the 12 million of Greece, I have the flexibility to do things that were very hard to implement in London. So going back to that agility point, I think it's very important for us to be able to communicate clearly among the public and the private sector. Is it a requirement? Is it a necessity? Is it something that's going to be enshrined in law, regulation, or otherwise being put forward? Or is it something that is optional? And I think that's where we need to do more. And we have a lot on our plate to learn from the communication world there.
Well, I wanted to sort of bring it closer to home and focus on businesses and different entities a little bit more. Because we often talk about cyber risk as a standalone issue, but it's very much a part, as we know, of a company's sort of bigger financial and operational picture. So what sort of strategies do you think can help businesses bring cyber risk into the same level of conversation, do you think, Jacky?
Well, I think it's really important that the discussion about cyber risk is had in the right room. We often see cyber risk being discussed among a group of technical people who are thinking, which new fancy tool will I put in to reduce my risk? Whereas actually the conversation really is about, well, how much risk are we prepared to carry? And have we put a financial value on what that might mean for us if that risk realized? And are we okay with that? And that conversation, I think, needs to be a more frequent conversation. It's really important that cyber risk is embedded into the whole enterprise's risk management framework, that it isn't isolated, and that the conversation happens between people who understand technology, who understand the business, who understand risk, and who have brought all of that together to work out what they actually think they need to do and what risk they're prepared to carry. So I think for me, it's not a solo sport. It's something that people need to do as a team, and they need to really listen to each other and learn how to listen to each other's language as well, because the language of risk is very different than the language of cybersecurity. So if you want to talk cyber risk, you need to be able to speak in both languages, or at least have an interpreter in the room who's going to translate the conversation for you, because otherwise things are going to be missed. And I think it's a huge responsibility that boards have at the moment to actually really get under the hood and understand the risk that their organisation is carrying, and not just accept the recommendations that come through. They need to challenge the recommendations and do what needs to be done by their organisation.
We've got about 10 minutes left, and I wanted to shift our focus now to innovation. Because, of course, we need to talk about innovation in all of this. So, Johan, I thought I'd start with you if possible. So how do you think different types of innovation in AI and identity and threat intelligence can really strengthen defenses? And what exactly are you, as well, at MasterCard investing in? Maybe you could tell us.
Yeah, look, this is the exciting part. And I think this is so important. We've talked a lot about risk here. We've talked a lot about the dark side of cyber, the impact, the negative impacts, and they are very real. But I'm an absolute firm believer that the opportunity that this enables and empowers for us by far outrun the risks that we're looking at. So if we can find the balance here, I believe cyber is fundamental for strong, long-term and sustained economic growth. If we can get this right and we can empower, it is there. I think things like AI and quantum will allow us to fundamentally shift the way we do business, the way we empower technology companies to create new businesses, consumers to create new businesses, consume new experiences, create better productivity out of the world. I think all of that is there. I think so. I'm very excited about where technology is going, also the advances in quantum and what that will do for us. Some of the things that we are actively working on, we've been working with normal AI for a very long time, since the early 2000s. And lately in generative AI, we've been doing some really interesting things. So for instance, part of our recorded future world that we live in, we're actually releasing AI agents that will automatically do threat hunting. So think of it as an antibody system that your body will have when you have an illness. Wherever it finds the virus will be there, the body will send its defenses there. Think of that same analogy in the way we can deploy AI to actually defend our systems. We're always worried about the attackers will come at us through automated bots, but I think that the technology is certainly there, and we are releasing this already. In fact, if you go onto the portals today, basically generative AI does almost everything that you need to know. You ask it a question and it will bring you the context back, but you can also deploy those. So there's a lot of really interesting things that are happening there. We're combining we've done a couple of things. And I'll be very quick here, but we are scoring every single financial institution and about 15 million different businesses all across the world on their cyber posture. And so we've got a very good assessment of the vulnerability risk against third parties. Now you overlay threat intelligence on top of it, we have the ability to shift from a vulnerability risk management framework to a threat-based framework, which means we can prioritize more accurate. And now you can leverage AI to get to the right place in a more appropriate and cost-effective way. So those are some of the things that really excites me about where we're going to go in the future.
Yeah, really exciting future ahead in terms of the innovation and what can be done. So Yiannis, back over to you. What sort of innovation in all of this do you feel can really help strengthen both the public and private sector? And how can we sort of align services at the same time, do you think?
I think key around innovation is to accept, either at a government or a big company scale, that you're going to have to partner with small companies, small but niche companies. In a previous role, I headed up cyber innovation that kind of went against the norm of having a preferred supply list or running your shop in a consistent way to modern IT technology principles. What does that actually mean? We're always going to have companies that are further ahead than us in specific niche areas of cybersecurity. It's just the nature of what we do today. So if we accept that, that means that within each of our organizations, there should be at least one person, ideally a department, that has an oversight of the key threats that Johan previously mentioned, the alignment that goes back to the network that Jacky mentioned, and then looks at how to satisfy those needs with niche vendors, how to support them. Please note that the company that is going to be excelling in cybersecurity AI risks is not going to have the NIS2 compliance that you expect, right? They're going to be a relatively small shop. They're going to probably be VC-backed, and they're going to probably be based in some of the exotic parts of the world that involve such hedge funds sponsoring startups, right? So what do? Do we close them out? No, we should foster innovation. And the way to do that is by cherry picking which threats we want to make sure that we have as a defense mechanism in our portfolio for innovative companies to come and help us out with. Please note, big disclaimer, don't give up everything to innovative companies, right? There should be a rigid structure that involves making sure that things like identity, data, sovereignty, and so on are also where they need to be in terms of technology services, Laura. But for the areas where we see threats and we're struggling, either financially, complex-wise, or through the need of just seeing what it is that we're faced up against, don't be afraid to partner with smaller players that have that cyber innovation.
Very well said. And back over to you, Jacky. Where does innovation come into all of this? And what are you maybe excited about? And how do you think businesses can really protect themselves with new innovation that's coming into market against ransomware and other major risks?
I think it's well known that Accenture are huge fans of AI and what it's going to mean for us. And I think when you translate that down to cyber risk and the risk that an organization could be carrying, most organizations are afraid of disruption. You know, they want to be able to continue on their day-to-day business. And as Yiannis and Johan said, a lot of that is around marrying up the threat intelligence and the data that's available to people to what exactly your company is doing and the type of infrastructure that you are utilizing, and putting those pieces of information together and looking to see whether there's somebody in your environment, whether there's somebody trying to get into your environment. And there's loads of really interesting practical ways that we are currently either doing or looking at to try and help with that. Really simple things like, you know, when someone's trying to get into your organization, get that initial access, we know that they are, you know, often trying to dupe the help desk. Like we've seen a lot of cases recently where this happens. And for those people to have an AI agent sitting over their shoulder and actually going, oh, I don't know if I'd listen to that now, or that mightn't be what it is, or that person's been on 4 times to other agents on this call center already this week, you know, would tell you that, yes, this is something that we can do. So I do think, you know, using AI to actually supplement, to be that advisor. And we're also doing things like getting our best security people, like who are operating security operations centers. And we are training agents on the decisions that we can see that they are making and doing more than just automating it. We're using AI to actually supplement what people are doing and make suggestions and second guess it. So I'm really excited about what this is going to mean for how we stop people breaking in, how we spot them when they're in there. And, you know, as humans, we can't be everywhere and do everything and always make the right decisions. But actually, AI is 24/7, like to be able to do this for us. So I'm really excited what that is going to mean, and the quality of work that people who work in cybersecurity are going to do as a result of that, rather than some of the repetitive things that we're doing today. So I see it having huge impacts, specifically in the cyberspace, but also generally kind of in businesses. And I think cybersecurity professionals have a huge responsibility to try and advise the rest of the business to do that within certain guardrails and to do it safely. Because we know, like, we have to be careful with AI. It's still fledgling, like it can still be like a naughty teenager in your house. So we have to do the right things to kind of put those guardrails in place and help people do it safely.
Very well said. We've got just 2 minutes left, and I'd very much like each of you maybe to sort of leave us with a key message here today. And a question that I actually wanted to ask you, maybe you can include it in your answer, is who do you think is the weakest link in all of this? Are people actually the weakest link? Maybe you can incorporate that into your answer. Jacky, why don't you start?
So it's a question that comes up all the time, and we know that often people are, you know, the one that clicks the button or the one that runs the malware or gives away the credentials that they shouldn't give. However, while I believe they're put in that position, so I think as technologists and the technology that people utilize today, we should actually build more protections into that to protect the people so that they're not getting exposed to those threats in the first place. So I would like to see that happening.
Yiannis, over to you. Final message, and who is the weakest link?
a process that doesn't have a next step is the weakest link, and we tend to be really good at it as humans, but it's not down to us. So security is a process, and very often where you have something that runs up to a certain set of steps and then, for some reason doesn't engage or connect with the next system, team, or governance, that's where typically you find hackers, swarming in and doing what they do best. So I would say one thing that we need to focus on is just being more resilient, asking the tough questions about why are things not interconnected, and also just simplifying things, Laura.
Very well said. Johan.
Gloria, so look, on the dark side of it, unfortunately, I think the humans are the weakest link. Most cyber attacks still come through human error, people clicking on links, social engineering. That's unfortunately what the numbers are telling us. Scams, the same thing. However, when it comes to the world of AI, humans have a massive role to play. And I'll give you an example. Back in 1983, a Russian soldier with the name of Stanislav Petrov was manning the nuclear button in Russia. And the data on the screen indicated that Russia was under nuclear attack from the United States. And his job was to press that button. And he didn't. He's probably the person that's responsible that most of us are still sitting here today, if not all of us. But he didn't trust the data. In the context of what he was looking at around the world, it didn't make sense to him, and he decided not to do it. That ability for a human reasoning beyond where the data is, I think is a big advantage for us. And when you put that together with AI, it just magnifies the opportunity ahead of us.
And there's that element of gut instinct that we shouldn't ignore at the end of the day,
Exactly
right? It's been such a pleasure speaking with you all. We cannot thank you enough. Thank you for such brilliant insights, those updates as well. And thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for our panel. Thank you.